Number 3. Karen Mauk. On October 25, 1954, Karen Mauk turned 6. She lived in East Coma, which is a borough of Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Her father was a steelworker, and her mother was a homemaker. She had 4 brothers and 2 sisters. That year, Halloween fell on a Sunday, and the people in Karen's neighborhood decided that Friday would be a better night to allow the kids to go out trick-or-treating. Karen's mom did not want her to go out trick-or-treating. Karen's mother had to attend a PTA meeting, and her father had to stay home to watch the other children. But Karen begged, and her mother agreed to let her go out. At about 6:30 p.m., Karen left her family's house wearing a hat and a white Cupid doll mask. She met up with some friends and her cousin, and they went off to do some trick-or-treating. At 7 o'clock, her cousin was called home, and Karen continued to trick-or-treat. At 7:30, Karen returned home, but she went back out again a few minutes later with 4 friends that her father didn't recognize because they were all wearing costumes. An hour and a half later, Karen hadn't returned home, and her parents became panicked. They looked around the neighborhood for her, but she was nowhere to be found. Her parents called the police, and they, along with the fire department, started to search for Karen. Karen's family fear was heightened when they learned that earlier in the evening, a 14-year-old girl in the neighborhood was attacked by a man. The girl screamed, and she was able to run away from the man without being physically harmed. When Karen's family called the police, officers were out looking for the man. Then the sense of dread worsened even more for Karen's family when they found out that Karen's hat and the pin she was wearing was found in an alleyway near their home. Just after midnight, an officer drove to a cemetery that was about 2 miles from Karen's home. He walked to a secluded area that had some high grass. That's when he found Karen's unclothed body. Her costume was in tatters beside her, as was her bag with candy in it. Her Cupid doll mask was missing. The cause of death was suffocation. The medical examiner thought that something like a coat had been placed over her air passages. The police immediately thought that the killer was a local person because he knew about the secluded area in the cemetery. Within 24 hours, the police had a suspect. Karen's hat and the pin she was wearing were found near the garage of a neighbor, 39-year-old Harry Gossard. Gossard had been married twice, and he worked as a merchant seaman, but he had been unemployed for nearly a year. The day after the murder, Gossard went to Philadelphia, and he was arrested as he was driving back home. He was taken to the police station, and he confessed to killing Karen. He said that he encountered Karen in the alleyway, and he lured her into his car. He said he drove to the cemetery, but he said he didn't remember what happened when they got there. He claimed he blacked out. Gossard said the next thing he remembered, he was carrying her back to the car, and he realized she didn't have a pulse. So he left her body in the high grass, and he drove home. He said that when he got home, he watched some television, and then he went to bed. Gossard was charged with Karen's murder, and he was held under heavy guard in the local jail. He was under heavy guard for his own protection from the residents of East Coma. On January 3, 1955, 2 months after Karen was killed, Gossard pleaded guilty to murder. In April, he was sentenced to death. On June 4, 1956, less than 2 years after the murder, Gossard was led to the electric chair. He was strapped in, and the only thing he said was, "Amen," in response to a prayer. At 9:01 p.m., 2,000 volts entered his body. 3 minutes later, 41-year-old Harry Gossard was pronounced dead. Gossard donated his body to science. Number 2. Tima Carter. On the afternoon of April 8, 1976, 3.5-year-old twin sisters, Tina and Mary Carpenter, were watching TV in the living room of their grandmother's home in Lawton, Oklahoma. Their grandmother was their legal guardian. While the girls were watching TV, their grandmother was vacuuming a different room in the house. When their grandmother came back into the living room, the girls were gone. In a panic, she looked around the house, but the girls were nowhere to be found. Several hours later, she called the police, and they immediately started to search the neighborhood, but they couldn't find any trace of the twins. About 48 hours after they went missing, 2 kids were playing in an abandoned building a few blocks from the twins' grandmother's home. In the dilapidated house, they heard what sounded like screams coming from inside an abandoned refrigerator. They decided to open the fridge, and Tina fell out. Amazingly, she was still alive. Her twin sister Mary was also in the fridge. Sadly, she was dead, and her body was decomposing. Tina was taken to the hospital, and she was later released to her grandmother. The medical examiner determined that Mary had asphyxiated to death. Tina had survived by breathing through a crack in the fridge. It appeared that they had been beaten and bit before they were locked in the fridge. The police interviewed Tina, and she identified her kidnapper. But because she was only 3.5 years old and had experienced a horribly traumatic event, the police weren't sure if what she said was true. The police investigated the person who Tina said kidnapped her and her sister, but they couldn't find any physical evidence that tied the person to the kidnapping. As a result, the case went cold after a few months. By Halloween 1977, a year and a half after the kidnapping and murder, there had been no arrests. On that Halloween night, Audrey and George Carter put their 19-month-old daughter, Nima, to bed in their 3-bedroom house in Lawton. Nima cried for a bit, but George and Audrey decided not to go into her bedroom because they knew she'd settle down and fall asleep soon. Eventually, she did quiet down, and then George and Audrey fell asleep in the living room. The next morning, they got up, and Audrey went into Nima's bedroom. She was immediately alarmed when she discovered that the toddler wasn't in her bedroom. Audrey and George desperately searched the house, but Nima was gone. They called the police, and a massive search for the toddler was launched. The police searched the Carter's house, and they noted that all the windows were locked. There were no signs of a break-in, so the police suspected that George and Audrey might have had something to do with the toddler's disappearance. They were questioned and asked to take a polygraph test. Both agreed to be tested, and they were asked if they knew what happened to Nima or if they were involved in her disappearance. They answered no to both questions. It was determined that they were telling the truth. It's believed that the kidnapper was hiding in the closet of Nima's bedroom when she was put to bed. The kidnapper picked up the toddler, carried her out of the bedroom, past the living room where George and Audrey were sleeping, and out the front door. Where the kidnapper went with Nima after walking out the front door was a mystery. After a few weeks, the searches for Nima started to wind down because no trace of the 19-month-old had been found. On November 23, 1977, just over 3 weeks after Nima was kidnapped, 22-year-old Gregory Goodall was doing some laundry at a friend's home, which was about 4 blocks from Nima's family's home. He decided to go get some cigarettes at a nearby store. On the way to the store, he cut across a lot that had an abandoned duplex on it. Out of curiosity, Goodall decided to explore the duplex. When he got inside, he found an abandoned fridge, and lying beside it was the body of a toddler. The body was identified as Tima Carter. The medical examiner determined that she had asphyxiated to death. The police learned that a few days earlier, a group of boys was in the duplex, and one of them opened the refrigerator door, and the body fell out. This frightened them, and they ran from the building. They did not tell anyone about the body because they thought they would be in trouble. The police, the media, and the public immediately saw the connections between the murder of Nima and Mary. Both victims were toddlers, and they were of Native American descent. They were both taken from their home while their guardians were in another room, and their homes were less than a mile from each other. Finally, in both crimes, the children were locked in a refrigerator in an abandoned building only a few blocks from their homes. After talking to George and Audrey, the police knew of another similarity between the two crimes. Tina, Mary, and Nima all shared the same babysitter, 18-year-old Jackie Rubidoux. The police had a suspect in Tina and Mary's kidnapping, and that was Rubidoux. She was 16 years old at the time of the kidnapping. She was the person that Tina identified as her kidnapper. Also, a neighbor had come forward, and she said she saw Rubidoux leading Tina and Mary away from their grandmother's house towards the abandoned house. The police interviewed Rubidoux after the twins were kidnapped, but she denied being involved. Without a confession, the police didn't feel that they had enough evidence to charge Rubidoux. They thought they didn't even have enough evidence to publicly name her as a person of interest. So unfortunately, George and Audrey Carter had no idea she was a suspect in Tina's murder when they hired her to babysit. After Nima's body was found, the police brought in Rubidoux for questioning, and she denied killing the 19-month-old. She said she was playing bingo on the night that she was kidnapped. However, the officers noted that Rubidoux did say some things about Nima's kidnapping and murder that only the killer would have known. Nearly 2 years after Tima Carter's murder, Rubidoux was charged with the murder of Mary Carpenter, but not for the murder of Nima. In February 1982, over 2 years after she was charged, Rubidoux went to trial for first-degree murder. It ended in a mistrial because the jury was deadlocked. She went to trial again over a year later, in May 1983. At the trial, even though Rubidoux had not even been charged with Nima's murder, let alone convicted of it, her murder was presented as evidence to show Rubidoux's pattern of behavior. Rubidoux was ultimately convicted, and she was sentenced to life in prison. Her lawyer appealed because she was a juvenile when she committed the murder. The appeal also said that since Rubidoux had not been convicted of Nima's murder should not have been mentioned at the trial. A panel of 3 judges upheld the conviction and the sentence. Rubidoux died in prison from liver cancer in August 2005. She was 46 years old. Nima's mother, Audrey Carter, died in 2000. George Carter is still alive, and he is haunted by the night that his daughter was kidnapped. He often wonders what would have happened if he had just looked in Nima's closet on that Halloween night. George is now convinced that Rubidoux killed his daughter. He said that Rubidoux adored Nima and he never thought she would hurt her. He wishes he got a chance to ask Rubidoux if she did kill Nima. He believes that she would have been honest with him. No one else has ever been charged in connection with Tima Carter's murder, but the police and the district attorney consider the case closed. Number 1. Maria Ciallella. Halloween 1981 fell on a Saturday. In Brick Township, New Jersey, it was a cold evening, but that didn't discourage kids from going out and enjoying their Halloween. At about 6 p.m., 17-year-old Maria Ciallella left her family's home to go out for the evening. She didn't come home that night, and her parents reported her missing. A police officer said that he saw Maria about half a mile from her home on the night she went missing. She was walking beside the highway shortly after midnight. The officer had to attend to something, but he planned to drive her home once he was done. The officer returned to the area less than 10 minutes later, and she was gone. The officer just assumed she got home or she was picked up by someone else, and he went on with his night. For over 2 years, Maria's family looked for her in vain. They plastered the community with missing persons reports, and they offered a reward for information. But no trace of Maria was found. Her family held out hope that she was still alive. But that hope was snuffed out in January 1984 when a body was found in a wooded area behind a Burger King in Ocean Township, New Jersey. The body was identified as 18-year-old Anna Olesowitz, who lived in Camden, New Jersey. She had been shot 4 times in the head with a small caliber gun. Olesowitz was last seen on the boardwalk in Ashbury Park, New Jersey on August 27, 1982, nearly 6 months before her body was found. After the body was found, a woman named Teresa Smith got in contact with the police. She told them that her former boyfriend, Richard Bagenwald, had killed Olesowitz. The police investigated Bagenwald, and they were shocked by what they found out. Bagenwald was born in August 1940 in Rockland County, New York. His father was an alcoholic who beat him. When he was 5 years old, Bagenwald set his house on fire. This resulted in him being admitted to a psychiatric hospital. When he was 9, he received electroshock therapy, and then he was sent to a state school. Bagenwald finished grade 8 when he was 16 years old, and then he tried high school, but he dropped out after a few weeks. In December 1958, Bagenwald was 18 years old, and he was living with his mother on Staten Island, New York. A week before Christmas, Bagenwald and a friend stole a car and drove to Bayonne, New Jersey. Bagenwald and his friend stopped at a small grocery store, which had just been purchased by 47-year-old Stephen Sladowski and his wife 4 months earlier. Sladowski was also the city's assistant prosecutor. Armed with a sawed-off shotgun, Bagenwald entered the store and found Sladowski working alone. He shot Sladowski once in the chest, grabbed $100, and ran to the car where his friend was waiting. Bagenwald got into the driver's seat and drove off. The next day, Bagenwald and his friend were speeding through Salisbury, Maryland in the stolen car. They were pulled over by a police officer. As the officer approached the car, Bagenwald fired his shotgun twice at the officer. The officer was grazed in the face with one of the pellets, and he fell to the ground. Bagenwald and his friends sped off. About 45 minutes later, a state trooper pulled Bagenwald over. As he approached the car, Bagenwald fired 2 shots at him. He missed, and the officer fired back. Bagenwald was hit in the right cheek, but he wasn't down. He started to reload his shotgun. The trooper ran at Bagenwald and kicked the shotgun out of his hand. He then put him under arrest. Bagenwald's friend surrendered without putting up a fight. In police custody, Bagenwald's friend told them that Bagenwald killed Sludowski. Bagenwald and his friend, who were both 18, were charged with first-degree murder. At their trial in August 1959, they were facing the death penalty, but they were spared that fate. Bagenwald was sentenced to life with the chance of parole, and his friend was sentenced to 25 to 30 years in prison. In the mid-1960s, while Bagenwald was serving his sentence, he met Darren Fitzgerald, who had been in and out of prison since 1955 for a variety of crimes like armed robbery. Bagenwald was paroled in 1975 after serving 17 years. For the next 6 years, Bagenwald had several brushes with the law, including being accused of sexual assault. But those charges were dismissed because the victim couldn't pick him out of a lineup. Bagenwald did violate his parole several times, and he was sent back to prison a few times for those violations. In February 1981, Bagenwald was out of prison, and Darren Fitzgerald got in touch with him. They spent time with each other, and they became close friends. In February 1982, Fitzgerald got a job as a manager of a house that was split into rental units in Ashbury Park. After he got the job, he convinced Bagenwald to move into a unit. Bagenwald, who was 41, moved into the unit with his girlfriend, 21-year-old Teresa Smith. Smith told the police that Bagenwald talked about how he and Fitzgerald would pick people at random and kill them just for the thrill of it. She said that Bagenwald really wanted her to come along on one of these random kills. On August 28, 1982, Smith said that Bagenwald woke her up early in the morning. Bagenwald wanted her to come out to his car because he found someone that he wanted to kill, and he wanted her to join him. She looked out the window and saw someone in the passenger seat of his car. She decided not to go out. Bagenwald got angry and he stormed out of the apartment. Smith said the next day Bagenwald picked her up at work and drove her to their home. He then took her into the garage that was on the property, and he showed her the dead body of a young woman that had a trash bag tied around her head. Bagenwald said he picked her up on the boardwalk. He then said he shot her 4 times in the head. Smith was asked why Bagenwald shot her, and Smith said it was just because she was there. After hearing Smith's story, the police arrested Bagenwald and Fitzgerald. Once Fitzgerald was in custody, he immediately started cooperating with the police. He said they started their killing spree on Halloween night 1981. He and Bagenwald were driving around Brick Township, New Jersey, and just after midnight, they came across a teenage girl who was walking alone on the side of the highway. They got her into the car, and Bagenwald shot her twice in the head with a .22 caliber gun. When Bagenwald shot people, he used a .22 caliber gun. He used this caliber because when someone is shot in the head with a .22 caliber bullet, the bullet doesn't usually exit the skull. Instead, it usually bounces around and causes more damage. Also, it doesn't cause much blood splatter. So it's an ideal caliber for shooting someone in a car. Fitzgerald said that Bagenwald killed the teenage girl just to watch her die. Her body was cut into 3 pieces and buried in Bagenwald's mother's yard on Staten Island. The police went to Bagenwald's mother's house and dug where Fitzgerald told them to. They found the bodies of two young women. One was buried directly above the other one. The body on the bottom was the teenage girl that Bagenwald and Fitzgerald picked up on Halloween. Through dental records, she was identified as 17-year-old Maria Ciallella. The body buried above her was identified as 18-year-old Deborah Osborne. Osborne was killed on April 5, 1982, about 6 months after Maria was killed. She was last seen in a tavern in Point Pleasant, New Jersey, about 3 miles from where Maria was kidnapped. Bagenwald told Fitzgerald that he had picked her up while she was hitchhiking. He ended up stabbing her 17 times. Fitzgerald said he wasn't with Bagenwald when this murder was committed. About 5 months after that, Bagenwald came across Anna Olesowicz on the boardwalk in Ashbury Park. He asked her if she wanted to smoke some marijuana, and she said yes. They smoked a joint, and he said he had more marijuana at home, and he convinced her to get into his car. Fitzgerald said that Bagenwald told him that Olesowicz was a training exercise for Teresa Smith. But when Bagenwald tried to get Smith to join him in the murder, she refused to come out to the car. So Bagenwald drove around with Olesowicz for a while, and then he shot her 4 times in the head. Fitzgerald said he helped Bagenwald dump her body in the wooded area where it was found 6 months later. One of the other residents of the house where Fitzgerald and Bagenwald lived was 34-year-old William Ward. Ward was a drug dealer, and supposedly Bagenwald worked as a hitman for him. Sometime in September 1984, Bagenwald and Ward got into an argument about a job. Bagenwald and Fitzgerald ended up beating Ward, and then Bagenwald shot him 5 times in the head. They buried his body on the outskirts of a cemetery in Neptune Township, New Jersey. Then on the night of November 20th, 1982, 17-year-old Betsy Bacon, who lived in Seagirt, New Jersey, left her home to go buy some cigarettes. Bagenwald picked her up, and he shot her twice in the head. Fitzgerald helped Bagenwald bury the body in a shallow grave off an unused road about 15 miles from their home. 2 months after Betsy's murder, Anna Olesowicz's body was found, and it led to the arrest of Fitzgerald and Bagenwald. In 1983, Bagenwald was found guilty of killing Anna Olesowicz, and he was sentenced to death. He was then convicted of killing William Ward, and he pleaded guilty to killing Maria Ciallella and Deborah Osborne. He was given a life sentence for each of those murders. He was never charged with the murder of Betsy Bacon. Fitzgerald testified against Bagenwald, and he was given a plea deal. He was just charged with possession of a weapon and for being an accessory to murder after the fact. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and he was paroled after 3 years. His current whereabouts are unknown. Richard Bagenwald died in prison in March 2008 at the age of 67. It's believed that he killed more than the 6 people he's credited with murdering. This includes a 57-year-old police informant named John Petrone. Petrone was a former convict, and he had been friends with Bagenwald in prison. They also spent time together once they were out on parole. Petrone disappeared in June 1978, 3.5 years before Maria was killed. Petrone's skeletal remains were found buried in a wildlife preserve in Jackson Township, New Jersey, in May 1983, 5 years after he went missing. All his bones were there with one exception: his jawbone was missing. The district attorney speculated that Bagenwald killed Petrone for 2 possible reasons. The first is that Bagenwald found out that Petrone was a police informant. It's also possible that Petrone extorted $2,000 from Bagenwald's mother. Another possible victim of Bagenwald's is 17-year-old Virginia Clayton, who lived in Freehold, New Jersey. She went missing on September 8, 1982, which is around the same time that Bagenwald and Fitzgerald killed William Ward. Virginia's body was found 3 days after she went missing in a ditch in the same wildlife preserve that Patron's body was buried. Their bodies were dumped about 4 miles apart. Virginia had been stabbed to death. Bagenwald was never charged with these murders, but he remains the prime suspect. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. Also, please go to criminallylisted.com where you can suggest cases, buy merch, and find out about an exclusive podcast. But that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching.